Hey everybody, I just deleted 70 videos. 70 stinky videos tonight. All I wanted to do was read you one chapter out of all of my books. I actually did this last Saturday and it was amazing, but I'm a little soft-spoken when I'm not loud. I know that probably doesn't make any sense, but it's just how it is. So I'm trying my hardest to make a video that is loud, but I'm tired of making videos, and I'm tired of messing up, and I'm tired of stopping after 3 minutes, or 30 seconds, or 3 seconds, or 13 minutes. So tonight, I am going to, rain or shine, read you a chapter of Malignant Transfiguration. If I mess up, I'm so sorry. I hate messing up. I hate it to my core, but, you know, life is a bunch of mess-ups. So I'm going to keep the bad video. I don't think it's terrible of my first book that I read aloud. I think I actually spoke loud enough in that one. But for the second one, I'm going to read you the first chapter. Yes, sorry about that. The first chapter of my second book. In the second book, I'm going to go into more details than the first one, because the first one you're just getting the overview, and the second one you're going to get to meet the dwarves and go into their dens. They have 5 main dens in the United States. You will get to see 2 of them. I had a blast while writing this because I just got to imagine all these dwarves and how they decorated everything. And maybe that sounds crazy, but I love decorating things. I also got to bring some of the history of the dwarves over into the United States, how they got here, when they immigrated, how they kind of integrated into our history. And there's also this element of girl power with the dwarves. You see the dwarves have split up. Their men and their women, which is actually part, if you look up dwarves online, that's actually a real thing. I didn't make it up. So I kind of continued that a little bit in this book. And so you have this one den that's all women, and they have their own army and everything, and it's just awesome. Anyway, let me read you the first chapter before I get all kinds of crazy and make a mistake and delete this video, okay? So I hope you enjoy. This is Chapter 1, The Girl and the Storm Within. There was a chill in Charlotte's bones that she was afraid would never leave her. No matter how hot she burned on the outside, deep within her remained a chill. It bit her on occasion, those memories of killing, of hopelessness, of important people leaving her. It was a chill that covered a life once beautiful and uncomplicated. There once were good times and good people and good memories. All of those things were there, dying under the chill. The first few days that the cold came creeping in, she would wince as if she were being physically harmed. But those moments came fewer and farther between now. Was it because she was used to the hurt now, or could it be vanishing? Was it too hopeful to believe that someday the chill would be gone? The heat in her body still burned. It had built from the small ember that had remained after she burned it away last time, until once again it roared and raged, and she could no longer control it. There was a charred field behind the castle, full of half-melted pots and quarterstaffs burned to a crisp. She had tried running again, but physical activity didn't help anymore. She refused to let another person get scarred from her touch, so every single day she collapsed in a different bed, exhausted from having to keep a watch to make sure nobody ever got too close. When her sheets went up in flames one night, she started sleeping on the floor. She knew everybody had finally learned to keep a good distance from her when they no longer reached out to her by habit. She learned quickly to smile and carry herself in a way that she could manage politeness when really all she wanted to do was scream and pull her skin off. The Alliance would meet soon. She hoped she could burn off the energy by then, but Barnabas had assured her that he had made plans so she could retain her seclusion for the safety of others and still be allowed to participate in the meeting. She, Barnabas, Alcott, and Phoebe would be leaving in 3 days. She was leaving the Hobbs in charge as Wilhelm continued repairs and added a hospital to the grounds, and one of her cousins was on his way to help in some way. Despite the fight between the cold and heat that swirled into storms inside, she did find happiness in a few things. Training with Phoebe was one. She found it easy to befriend the leather-loving fawn with a ponytail and piercings. Phoebe, like every fawn she had met, was blunt. The bluntness might put others off, but Charlotte had grown to enjoy knowing exactly what was on her mind. Phoebe didn't hold secrets, and she wasn't afraid of Charlotte. Every day they battled in the fields, filling the air with the smacks of wood against wood or wood against flesh. Today Charlotte's mind was feeding a small flicker of hope that she would see Leander and Layla at the Alliance meeting and hear some small news of her parents. Her thoughts wandered as she fought until a smack of Phoebe's quarterstaff against her already bruised thigh brought her back to reality, and she attacked back with fervor. "About time," Phoebe chided her as she blocked. "I thought I was battling a corpse this morning." Charlotte didn't even bother rolling her eyes. "You're as bad as your father, you know that?" "That's a pathetic comeback," Phoebe said as she slammed into Charlotte's quarterstaff. Charlotte gripped the wood tighter and dug her heels into the ground. And how would you define joking about corpses so soon after being in a field full of them? After seeing your parents' bodies cold on the ground? She asked as she pushed back at Phoebe to separate them. "How little you know of fawns. They stopped fighting physically. We simply don't care the way you softy races do." Phoebe nodded toward the castle. "Speaking of softy races, here comes one of your hobs." Charlotte's attention shifted to the rear of the castle, where Chime exited the kitchen's Dutch doors with a tray. She tossed her quarterstaff down on the charred ground and frowned. She wasn't sure if she could tolerate another round of Chime versus Phoebe. She loved them both. Chime was her childhood friend, sewn of dolls and dresses and dreams. Phoebe was her new friend, forged of battle and losses and victory. She needed the night and day of them both. Charlotte stretched her arms and legs. She reached for the gloves she left on the ground and slapped them against her legs to knock off the dirt and ashes. "We should call it quits for the day. My cousin will be here soon, and I need a bath." "That's another thing you should stop doing so frequently," Phoebe said as she spun her quarterstaff before tossing it in the air and catching it upon its return. "Every now and then I find a good lake or river." "And drown yourself?" Chime cut in sweetly as she neared them. "Good idea, but in the meantime have a lemonade." "Thanks, Chime." Charlotte slipped her gloves back on and took a glass. Phoebe and Chime glared at each other, but Phoebe nodded thanks and grabbed the other lemonade. When Charlotte had invited the remaining fawns to stay at the castle, she had had no idea what she was getting herself and everybody else into. Joseph nearly had a breakdown twice a day now, and Basil had turned in his notice to her that morning between pieces of toast. She wasn't sure what that signified, since the Hobbs were tied to the castle and her family, but she would have to talk to him this evening. She supposed she could ask the fawns to leave, but she hated to go back on her word. It was Spindle, Chime's husband, who had reminded her in the middle of one of Phoebe and Chime's arguments the day before that it was likely the fawns would leave soon anyway. It was not their nature to stay in one place for so long. Chime was beaming in her slacks and button-up blouse. Her short brown hair fell to just above her first tattoo. She and Spindle had both had forever tattooed across their shoulders. Marriage looked good on her. Charlotte wondered if it would look good on her someday. Familiar warmth crossed her cheeks, so she turned her face toward the forest. The thought of it made her breath catch, and she didn't want her friends to see the blush on her cheeks and launch into a debate again. Every night it was the same argument. Chime would encourage Charlotte to marry Beau sooner rather than later. Phoebe would encourage Charlotte to abandon the idea. Charlotte was sick of the back and forth between the two. Beau was the one she needed to talk to, but he was back home with his people until the meeting. Chime turned to Charlotte. "Charlotte, your cousin sent word that he will arrive by the portal in an hour. However, Alcott and Barnabas are having fits with it. His arrival may be delayed." "Chime, remind me to ask Alcott if we can possibly move that thing once it is repaired. I don't like it being hidden away in a closet. It needs to be somewhere open and protected." "I'll see to it myself," Chime said pleasantly. She had been working with Joseph a lot lately. Charlotte suspected that with her father gone, Joseph was preparing Chime to take his role someday soon. Phoebe returned her glass to the tray. Why did your father put it in a closet anyway?" "He liked things old-fashioned," Charlotte explained. "It was a passion for him. He had it because it was necessary, but he wanted it out of sight." "How quaint," Phoebe smirked. "I suppose you just went along with it, didn't you?" "I have a device or two from college hidden in my room," Charlotte said with a shrug. "He was my papa. I loved him. I guess I never really had any reason to want life to be different than it was." "Yet here you are anyway," Phoebe said. "You're lucky I've already put my quarterstaff down," Charlotte snapped at her. Chime stepped in between them. He was a good man. I hope you hear something from them soon, Charlotte. I wish I could go to the Alliance meeting with you. Oh, do you? Phoebe laughed. But you are staying here to clean the castle and have little Hobbs who will grow up to clean the same castle. Honestly, you Hobbs are completely boring. Haven't you any aspirations? Oh, you mean what your lot does? Chime narrowed her eyes. Run around and have fun your entire lives with nothing to show for it. You have no aspirations other than a lifetime of hopping through the flowers with the bunnies. Phoebe swung her quarterstaff at Chime, who quickly flipped the tray to block the strike. The glasses fell to the ground and shattered. Chime grinned. Nice try, Fawn. Phoebe tossed a quarterstaff to the ground. She paced back and forth twice and sighed and nodded. Well done, Hob. I'll see you two later. Charlotte adjusted her gloves. Try not to kill each other, please. I have enough on my plate without losing two friends. She looked at each one for a long moment. Get out of here, Phoebe said as she stepped forward to not so gently tug one of the white sections of her hair. Your eyes are nearly all the way changed. We will have a wedding by the end of summer, Chime grinned. Or will it be the end of spring? Charlotte thought of Chime's wedding. It had been small by normal Hob standards, but it had been helpful to celebrate something good after all they had been through. Must we really speak of such heinous things? Phoebe snarled. You'll have to wear a dress, Charlotte teased her. Phoebe paled. Please tell me that's some kind of sick joke. Chime tapped her foot in the dirt. You might as well get used to the idea. You have certain responsibilities, Phoebe. You can't run from them forever without risking your species' survival. What are you talking about? Charlotte turned to Chime. Phoebe is the eldest fawn now, Chime explained. I am not. Philip can hardly be counted on, Chime argued, and from what Charlotte has said, he's had multiple surgeries. It's up to you now. Phoebe glared. I wish I'd been born later. It's not so great on the bottom either. Chime rolled her eyes and then turned to Charlotte. She must find a mate, and they will be the next Faunus and Fauna. Now you're joking, Charlotte laughed. She looked over at Phoebe, who was scowling at the sky. Phoebe? Charlotte asked. Is it true? Phoebe grimaced and kicked the dirt. She grunted and looked up, but then ran off into the woods. Chime, Charlotte said. I've never seen her act like this before. I think you went too far that time. Chime shrugged. She has a responsibility, Charlotte. Somebody has to say it. She'll respect your honesty, Charlotte said, but I think she needs a friend to hear her out, too. Chime raised her eyebrows. Are you asking or commanding? Chime! Charlotte snatched the tray out of her hands. You know me better than that. Fine. Chime marched after Phoebe. All right, good luck. Charlotte headed toward the castle. She didn't envy Phoebe. The survival of an entire species was a lot of weight to have on your shoulders, especially when you didn't agree with how it worked. She dropped off the tray in the kitchen, found an empty room near the portal, showered and changed into one of the 3 special outfits the fairies had left for her to help control the heat she emitted uncontrollably. Bo also had an outfit, but somehow he was the only one able to touch her skin to skin, so he didn't wear it. She still wondered what exactly had happened that evening. The scars on Bo's arms from her violent transformation still haunted her dreams. So did the one she left on Evangeline during that long ride. She had controlled herself then, but it wasn't enough. Even the clothes had not been enough that time. Alcott and Barnabas were still busy in the hallway closet when she arrived to wait for her cousin. Charlotte leaned against the wall and thought of the day before. Joseph had followed her around the castle all morning, eyes darting and hands fidgeting, until at last she had demanded that he tell her what was going on. Your father had a younger sister. She shuffled her papers. Susan? She died a long time ago, right? Right. You have a cousin who will be visiting tomorrow. His voice trailed off. I don't remember a cousin. You were very young the last time you saw him. Oh. She flipped the next page over and signed the back. What does he want? He heard about what happened with your parents and he wants to introduce himself. Offer support, be family. She dropped the pen. How did he hear? Joseph's face had gone white. Your father left me instructions to contact your cousin in case anything ever happened to him and your mother. Oh, of course. He needs to know. Charlotte had clenched her fist and shook her head. I can't shake his hand, though, Joseph. I'm a mess inside. What kind of family will I be to him? I think he means to be there for you. Charlotte blinked and wiped away a tear. She focused back on the present and the 2 dwarves arguing over the portal in the closet. The closet was the size of a small room, with a large rectangular platform in the center rear of the room. Alcott had a panel open on one side, and Barnabas was in the front working on another panel. There were 4 panels in the front and 3 on the sides. Each panel had a different flower etched into it. "It's beautiful." Charlotte leaned against the doorframe. Barnabas and Alcott stood and then bowed low. "It's good to see you, Charlotte," Barnabas smiled. Charlotte loved how his face was covered with creases and his graying head of hair and beard were braided and tied off with thin strips of leather. He wore his Magard suit of dark blue with gold buttons shaped like mountains. "The portal was for your father, whether he liked it or not. The flowers were for your mother." Charlotte stepped back into the hall. "How is it going? Chime says it's giving you troubles." "We're still having problems with it. Someone has been tinkering with it," Barnabas admitted, "but we will figure it out. Dwarves made the portals, you know." He smiled and knelt to rub his hand over the top of the portal. "I enjoyed every moment I worked on this for your father. He would never admit it, but he did find it handy now and then." "I had no idea he even used it," Charlotte admitted. Barnabas smiled fondly. "No, your father wouldn't have told you much about it, let alone show you how to use it. He didn't want you stumbling upon it when you were small, and then even when you were older, he probably didn't even think about it much." A voice laughed from the hallway. "No, I doubt it." They all turned to see 2 men standing behind them. Charlotte's heart leapt straight to her throat and tears threatened her eyes. The speaker, who she guessed to be her cousin, could have been her father's twin. He had short, wavy black hair and the same sea eyes her father had. He was dressed in a black suit with a striped black shirt and nice dress shoes. Across the bottom of his face was a week-old 5 o'clock shadow. His jacket was folded across his arm, and an easy smile was flung across his mouth. Charlotte reminded herself to keep breathing. And standing. She wanted so badly for this ghost of her father to actually be him. Barnabas stepped forward to hug the man. They slapped each other on the back. "It's good to see you, David. It's been such a long time." "Oh, years apart are nothing between old friends," David laughed as they separated. He turned to Charlotte, and his eyes softened a bit, and a smaller smile lit up his mouth. "I should have thought to warn you, but I'm not sure words would have worked alone. You look like you've seen a ghost." He tossed his jacket over his shoulder and extended a hand toward her. She stepped back quickly and slammed into the door frame. She felt her cheeks redden as she stepped to the side and back before addressing him. "Oh, I'm sorry. You must not know. I don't shake hands anymore." He chuckled and stepped closer, bringing the smell of leather and mint and tea with him. "It's okay. My friend and I are wearing pot holders for the occasion." Charlotte noticed then that they both wore gloves. She looked at him fearfully at first, then forcefully soon after. She shook her head firmly. "I'm sorry, but I don't want to hurt you." He reached out and grabbed her hand. She gasped, her eyes widening in shock. He shook her hand firmly and then covered the top of her hand with his other hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "Now that's better. I imagine you must miss this part, and what's family for anyway?" He winked and pulled his gloves off to show her his hands. "Good to go." Charlotte continued to stare as the man smiled and stepped back. His friend stepped forward next and offered his hand. He wore a shoulder-length head of red hair and a short beard. He was dressed in jeans, boots, a nice dress shirt, and a dark pea coat. She pulled her hand into a fist at her side before releasing it. His hand stayed in the air between them, the offer of touch taunting her. She lifted her hand to his, letting the tips of his fingers graze the tips of hers. I messed that up, sorry. He slipped his hand into hers, and for the slightest of second she felt like her fingers were remembering another handshake long ago. She pulled back from him quickly, and the sensation vanished. The second man stepped behind her brother's right shoulder. "Daredevils, are we, gentlemen?" she asked without a want of reply. She shook her head at them before focusing back on David. "So you are one of my cousins. I've heard some stories of Aunt Susan, but I admit that they were a little vague. I don't remember any mention of her having children." "Well, child," David corrected. "Susan was a bit of a wanderer, and she couldn't have done that with more than one." He smiled warmly and looked over at his companion. "Before I jump into my story, I'd like to introduce you to my friend Vincent. He has a long story, but the short version is that I've been teaching him to use his weaver skills. He's not much of a speaker at times," David chuckled, "but when he does talk, you better watch out." The men exchanged a glance before looking back at Charlotte. "How did you get here?" Charlotte asked with a nod toward the portal. David snapped his fingers. "Oh, I used a temporary portal that I had shipped to Alcott just in case. When I searched for portals in your area, yours was the only one I found, and it was fuzzy. I don't know about you, but I like to make sure all of me gets through safely." "You don't just search for portals," Barnabas exclaimed with a huff after glaring at his son. "It's not like there's a database for them." "Oh, there's one in the works. I'm on the board overseeing the entire project," David said. "Barnabas, you must know how I feel about these things. What good is it to have portals if you don't know where you can go?" Barnabas shook his head. "I do know, but it doesn't mean that I can agree. I know Isaac would not have." "David's one of the weavers who believes in meshing technology and magic. He's quite talented, actually," Alcott bragged. Alcott was the spitting image of his father, with the exception of having brown hair with just a twinge of gray. He wore a suit as well, though his was blue with silver mountaintop buttons. "Why, thank you, Alcott," David beamed as they shook hands and hugged. Barnabas turned to his son. "Not you two." "Yes, father," Alcott responded. "I think they're on to something." He turned to Charlotte. "I believe David will be very helpful to have around. A lot is changing in the magical world, and we could use his help." Barnabas closed his eyes and stroked his long beard. He finally sighed and opened his eyes again. "You may be right, son, but for now I'd like to focus on getting this portal up. We can all discuss more of this at supper tonight." "I'll show them to some rooms," Charlotte offered, and they left the two dwarfs to mumble over the portal. She walked quickly through the hall, turning her head to gauge the distance the men held behind her. "I'd actually like to visit the library first, if you don't mind," David mentioned the second time she looked back. Charlotte stopped. She had planned to house them in guest suites, but it would be easier for her if they were out of the way. "Sure," she answered with a smile. "In fact, you can stay in the adjoining family quarters." "Where do you sleep?" David asked, eyebrows raised and lips drawn tight. "Wherever I find a place I like for the night," she answered firmly before heading toward one of the two large staircases that joined the lobby to the second floor. She ran her hand over the mahogany banister as they descended, spilling her nervousness into the smooth wood. "Charlotte?" David said behind her. She turned to address him and noticed that she had left scorch marks where her hand had rested. She lifted her hand off the banister immediately and wrung her hands. She looked up at him. "Do you see now why you shouldn't touch me?" Charlotte let her eyes fall to the once perfect wood and felt another little part of her heart shatter. She picked up her pace again. David and Vincent quietly followed her. When they turned to follow the hall to the right wing, a couple of fawns breezed by, kicking a ball between them. Joseph popped up and shouted as he ran after them. "Take your games outside where they belong." He stopped when he saw Charlotte's group. He paled and his eyes widened. He straightened his tie. "Ah, David, I thought you were Isaac for a moment." David smiled and shook Joseph's hand. "Good to see you once more, Joseph. I seem to have shocked Charlotte as well." Joseph took a raggedy breath. "If you'll excuse me, I have some stray fawns to kick out in the lawns." "Are you okay, Joseph?" Charlotte asked. "Hindsight can be cruel. Excuse me, dear." He bowed and disappeared. Charlotte reminded herself to check with him tonight as she took her guests to the library. It was still and quiet. The sunshine was one of the few visitors the library had had lately. Even Charlotte had stayed away after she had packed a few of her things. Standing in the library again tickled her senses with the smell of frankincense and books and parchment and ink. The smells delighted her nose and teased her memories of many childhood hours spent reading and playing in the room. She caught herself longing to be small enough again to hide under her father's desk while he taught his classes. She remembered the polish of his shoes and the sound of his calming voice as it danced across the room to his students. Now the room held memories and secrets and farewells. She blinked and realized that she had gone quiet. Both men patiently stood in front of her. David smiled softly. "Pardon me," she said. "I got caught up in memories." She calmed her breathing and blinked the memories away before smiling again. Her mother wouldn't have lost a beat, but she struggled with being a proper hostess. "David, you and your friend can stay as long as you like. I'm not sure what you have in mind for helping, or how long it will take, but you have an open invitation to stay here as long as you don't cause trouble." David's eyes lit up and he smiled. "Do I look like trouble?" "Oh, I didn't mean to imply you were trouble," she corrected herself, but now she wondered if he was. She tapped the edge of her father's desk with her nails. "I recently invited the Fawns to stay with us, and I have found that it was a much larger decision than I had originally anticipated." "You have a good heart," David said as he dug something out of a pocket and handed it to Vincent. "Not good enough to think about what that decision might do to my Hobbs," she responded. "Hindsight's a good teacher for the future," David said. "You even sound like Papa," Charlotte said softly. She breathed deeply and blinked quickly. "This is hard on you. I'm sorry for that. I wish I had had the foresight to think about what effect I might have on you, David said as he sat down at the desk. Do you know how closely you resemble him? She asked. I've never given it much thought, he said as he looked over at Vincent, who was inspecting the bookshelves. Vincent, did you notice? Vincent turned to him in a quiet look Charlotte couldn't read past between them. Vincent turned back to the books while David turned back to her. Vincent seems to agree with you. Does this Vincent speak for himself? She asked as she looked over at the man's back. She saw a small shake of his shoulders, but he continued on without a word or look at her. He can be slow to warm, David said with a grin. He reached across the space between them to squeeze Charlotte's hand. She flinched and pulled away. And you're slow to learn. You'll have to keep your distance if you expect to stay here long. I'm not a distance person, Charlotte, David said as he examined his gloves. It's not good for you either. I'm aware, Charlotte said as she stepped away, but I'm afraid I don't have much of a choice in the matter. She stroked one of the books her father had left on the desk. It was one of his teaching manuals. She hadn't had the heart to put it away, and she had told Joseph that she expected it to stay on her father's desk for now. She looked over at David and gave him a small smile she hoped would ease the awkwardness. Were you one of Papa's students? It's hard to pinpoint your age. Yes, I was one of his earliest apprentices. We had our differences, but he was a phenomenal teacher. He sat back in the chair at the desk and folded his hands behind his head. He was well loved by his students, she said, trying to keep her voice under control. She had to talk about something else other than her father. The smell of his cologne still touched the items in his room. It was the same in her family's quarters. Her mother's perfume could set her to tears. What exactly are you thinking about helping us with here? Oh, sorry. Again. David sat forward. I think you need me right now. We do need to advance our technology at the castle, she admitted. David nodded slowly and locked his gaze with hers. Yes, there is that. I heard that you were rebuilding and that you all had to improvise some technology recently. I can help bring you all up to speed and surpass even what most weavers know about technology and magic. It's my specialty, as you've heard. He put his elbows on the desk and clasped his hands. I believe you'll be leaving soon for the Alliance meeting. I will also be attending, and I'd like to travel with you and get to know you. We appreciate any help you can give us, Charlotte said. I will introduce you to Wilhelm tonight. He's in charge of the rebuilding and can work with you. She paused. There was no reason he couldn't go with them. I'd like to get to know you, too. It will put my mind at ease knowing he was working here. Oh, I know Wilhelm. David laughed. Better than you, I believe. His teasing eyes sparkled again. I only met him recently, she admitted. How do you know him? I lived with the elves for a time. More than once, actually. I tend to frequent certain festivities. He chuckled. I'll take you sometime if you like. I'd like that, she admitted. I've only experienced other Magani here. Then you need to visit them all in their homelands, he said. You don't know a Magani until you visited them in their own home. He stood and walked over to the front of the desk where she was standing. He let his fingers tiptoe along the edge of the desk. She pulled her arms across her chest and stepped back. There's another reason I think you need me around, Charlotte, he said as he let his arm fall back at his side. What's that? She asked curiously as she stepped to the side of the desk. Space. She needed more space. She hid her shaking arm behind her back. She should have worked harder this morning. She was losing her grip quickly. David's smile deepened and his eyes lit up. I'm not your cousin. I'm your brother. Whew. I need to put a glass of water in here when I'm doing this. Okay. So that's chapter 1. And if you want to know what happens, you'll have to get the book. And of course, if you haven't read the first book, you should read that one first. I hope you enjoyed. This was really fun getting to share that chapter with you, and I hope you enjoy the books. As always, battle bravely, love strongly, and I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.